Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Weller and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Not necessarily Dungeons and Dragons 5e. This is my Christmas special where I talk about the real issues with regard to Dungeons and Dragons and Christmas. I want to make it really clear to everybody who thought they were showing up for a video or discussion about how to run a Christmas-themed Dungeons and Dragons adventure. That is not my intention. Although that would be fun, and I'm sure there are lots of ways of doing that. There are people out there who've already done videos on that topic. I'm going straight to the crux of the issue. That's what I do here. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is let's think about Christmas in terms of its message, the Christmas spirit. It's really where man, woman, everybody is joining together, getting to know each other, and there's supposed to be some sort of connection between everybody, where we treat each other with respect in a good way, being nice to each other. And so the real message for this video is the discussion of good and evil. Oh my. I know a few of you have been thinking, this is supposed to be coming at some point, but I was expecting the video to say good and evil. No, I think this is the right time to talk about good and evil. Good and evil as a concept for your own life and for Dungeons and Dragons, and how you could take it from your own personal life and the history of your ancestors and apply it into a Dungeons and Dragons game, and also to sort of give you sort of an idea of what the concept of good and evil is. Now, all of you should have a pretty good understanding, because every single culture for thousands and thousands of years has got a rich and clear pathway in terms of what is considered good and evil. Whether you agree with me on that or not, I'm not going to get into an argument on it, but the history is there. If you've ever studied history, you know that it does actually exist. There is plenty of information. Here we go. So good. What is good defined as? Well, apparently good is defined as a morally right action or attitude. Usually when it comes to morals, we're talking about actions rather than attitudes, but it could be applied to that same way. It's talking about a high standard, and when we talk about a high standard, we're talking about a high standard of morals or ethics. We're talking about some sort of benefit or advantage. So that apparently there's some sort of benefit or advantage to doing things that are good, and also good is also sort of associated with approval. So that all seems like a very sort of hairy subject, doesn't it? It doesn't seem very clear. Well, that's just the definition you find on the internet. And as we know, the internet, although you can find lots of very, very useful things there, not necessarily going to tell you everything you need to know, and not necessarily going to be very accurate either. Okay, what is evil defined at? Evil is defined apparently as being immoral. Well, that's really helpful. We need to know what moral is now. It's apparently wicked. Sin, so you need to understand what sin is. Wrong or badness. And it's often apparently associated with, but not always, with a supernatural force. And to a large extent, a lot of people would attribute good to a supernatural force. But that's not always the case. So there's the topic for today. The whole concept comes back, when you talk about good and evil, it comes back to morals and ethics. So what is it? What is a set of moral standards or rules or guidelines or whatever they are? What are morals and what are ethics? Unfortunately, the human race is prone to studying everything, and there is a thought, it's called philosophy. I did way too much philosophy when I was at university. Therefore, the concept of good and evil is something I have studied extensively, and the whole bunch of theories that are associated with it. So morals have been proposed to consist of different theories, and there are different people who think different ways about how a moral code or a moral set of guidelines might work, or rules, whatever you want to call them. They are a way of living. Essentially, that's the concept behind morals and ethics. So the first one that's often proposed, and that is, as we always love to, we go back to evolution, where morals are evolving over time and developing and changing. They are starting at one point and they're moving towards something else. The problem with this concept of morals, although I'm not going to say it's wrong, is that means that it's quite possible in terms of the evolution of a moral society or people, that you might start with something that's quite immoral and become more moral, but there's also the possibility of going backwards again. So it's not like it would be a trend from not knowing and understanding what morals are to a point where there is a fairly high standard and well-developed understanding of morality in your society and world. So it doesn't follow that there's a straight line to that. It might actually have a whole lot of humps involved. So that doesn't really help us in terms of defining what morals are, certainly in our own lives. And I suspect as history plays out, we will see a pattern that looks a lot like an upward trend, hopefully, with a lot of humps along the way, like a lot of data tends to sort of show, particularly when it comes to the development of a society and a world. When it comes to human development, it hasn't always been an upward trend. It doesn't matter what it has been, whether it be technology or the development of civilizations, or even the development of morals. Okay, number 2 has also been spelled out, because we're in the age of reason, aren't we? Everything has to have a really good reason. So morals are based on reason. If it makes sense and is logical, then that's the thing you can do. The problem is that it's quite possible for somebody to come up with a perfectly logical reason for doing something that could consist of going left, going right, killing somebody, not killing somebody. So really, reason isn't a very good way of measuring morality and figuring out where it's going and how it's developed. So we're going to leave reason. It's fine for things like the natural sciences, but the thing is that you're dealing with philosophy, and philosophy is not natural science. It's another step up in the chain in terms of the development of any kind of organism, where it has to consist of a structure and form itself around essentially what is a civilization. Even an ant colony has to have a set of ways of operating. Now, whether they call them morals or not, it's a way of operating that insists or ensures the survival of that species. And that's sort of the concept behind that. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Number 3, often pulled out, well, morals are measured by your conscience. If you think it's wrong and you feel badly about what you did, then it's immoral. If the thing you did doesn't create that feeling or those thoughts in your head, then you are following your conscience and you're performing a moral act. Problem is, there are plenty of people who think all sorts of horrible things, and so conscience isn't a good measure either, because it's only measured by individuals rather than the entire society or organism or animal ecostructure. So it doesn't really work. Conscience is something that you develop over time, and it's not necessarily going to be tied directly to good and evil. Conscience is one of those things that, unfortunately, like all things, is learned. Okay, so let's fall back on number 4. How does number 4 play out? Well, apparently, if we just follow human nature, then we will be able to understand what is good and what is evil in our world. Again, it doesn't follow, because there have been plenty of times when human nature is to pretty much take stuff from everybody else, hoard as much as they possibly can, and engage in war, killing and doing all sorts of other horrible things. Human nature is not necessarily a good or evil thing. It's movable and in flux, so it's not a good indication. Human nature is really the very, very primitive and basic concept of any organism, where all it does is do whatever it likes to survive. And that's not really what we're looking for. If we have any chance of surviving as a society, then we wouldn't be using that as a measurement for good and evil. So human nature, not really a good measurement. Okay, it got more advanced as the theories got thrown out and people sort of started thinking about what's the concept, how do we measure, what is a good moral code. Utility was thrown out there as, well, look, utility is the greatest good. If whatever takes place in the world is for the benefit for the greatest number of individuals, then that's the right thing to do. Now, it's very sort of democratic, I guess. It's very sort of got that feeling of, well, we're appealing to those, the majority, and those who aren't the majority won't benefit from this. Yet again, there's problems with this. Utility is, again, a flawed concept, because all you need is to have 51% of your population happy with the situation, and the other 49%, which is still a huge number, don't benefit from the situation, possibly at the expense of those who are the 51%. So utility doesn't really work as a moral code either, particularly if you expect to have a society that will exist on and continue for some time. And it's certainly not the message that is given over or presented as part of the holiday Christmas festival and celebration. It certainly doesn't have any reflection on the concepts behind Jesus Christ and God, which are fundamentally tied to the Christmas holidays. Okay, so let's look at the next one, and that is number 6. A lot of people will say, well, it's about God. God tells us this, and that's what's moral, and these other things that God says we shouldn't do is immoral. Again, problematic, because there's always that argument, right? Oh, well, is there a God? Isn't there a God? But here's the thing. If you celebrate Christmas, great. But if you're celebrating Christmas and you don't believe in God and you don't believe in Jesus, then why are you celebrating it other than to make sure that you're getting a present? I feel like God is a problematic area for dealing with morals. But fundamentally, when it comes to Christmas and the Christmas holidays, understanding and believing in God and Jesus Christ makes perfect sense. How do we relate this to our Dungeons & Dragons game? Well, there are many different gods within our Dungeons & Dragons universe, but there may in fact be one outstanding god who stands above the rest. I mean, with regard to Greek mythology and the deities that were revolving around that, we had Zeus was the pinnacle, and everybody else was sort of situated slightly further down, and they had a different focus, whereas Zeus was the father of all gods. If your beliefs is Christianity, then of course you would not be following that particular deity. Okay, all right. So number 7. Number 7 is actually quite an interesting idea in terms of morals, and that is that as long as you don't cause harm, whether that be emotional, psychological, or physical, then the action you're taking is moral and not immoral. It's got a lot of merit. The only problem with that is sometimes it's hard to understand how to measure that. I mean, physically causing harm, that's easy to deal with. Emotional harm, very, very difficult to measure and hard to establish for both parties involved. And then psychological damage, again, can be quite difficult to present and figure out how that works. But I like the idea that not causing harm is considered a good action in terms of a moral code. Number 8 I found more interesting when I was doing my studies, and I feel like it actually plays in more with the concept behind Christianity and Christmas and the Christmas spirit and all of the things that are tied to that. And this is the maxim, basically. that the universal application, so whenever you use this application of whatever you're trying to do, it has to apply to absolutely everybody in the world, all the time, no exceptions. And if you can't apply it to that world and the world actually function, then you know it's an evil act. It's a wrong act, rather than being a good action. So the concept being that if everybody goes around and steals from everybody else all the time, it would just cause complete strife and chaos, and the whole society and world would break down. Essentially, if everybody stole all the time from everybody, everything, it would cause complete breakdown of the entire society. And it would also cause a lot of harm, but the concept is everybody has to be applied and it has to happen all the time. I think this is essentially what Christianity is trying to sort of fundamentally present. But they're using, easier concepts for you to understand when they present it to you. For those of you who are unaware, we have a thing called the 10 Commandments. So if you have part of the Christian faith, the 10 Commandments give you sort of a guideline for determining what is considered good and evil. And I'm not going to go through the 10 Commandments because that's not really the purpose of this video at all. But to give you an idea, when you are trying to establish what is considered good and evil in your own Dungeons and Dragons world, and how it should be laid out and how it should work, one of the key things I want you to think about with regard to that is think about, can you apply this principle or rule universally across everybody within the Dungeons and Dragons world all the time? And if you can, and it causes no harm, then you know you're probably on the right track in terms of establishing in your world and explaining to your players who give you, or your dungeon master, give you the, well, yes, but good and evil is always relative argument, which I always felt was a completely flawed argument based on really poor assumptions to begin with. Okay, now, if you don't need to worry about those sorts of things, that's great. If you do, then I'm hoping this video will be helpful. But this is really about the Christmas spirit. I mean, really, I'm doing this video to talk about good and evil because that's what I think the crux of the Christmas celebration is all about. It is about good and evil. But I want you to look after yourself, your family and your friends and your neighbours, even the ones that you don't particularly like, because they are people too, and they have a place and a path to follow in this world just like you do. And you've got to remember, it's about treating everybody as if you are treating yourself. Everybody is sort of a reflection of yourself in some way. Look, I am really hoping that this was helpful and useful to people in some way. If it wasn't, I do apologise. I'm tried to sort of make things really, really meaningful for you in terms of a holiday message, and also to give you a good understanding of what I'm talking about, particularly if you find at times it's a little bit hard to understand these concepts. Apparently, in this day and age, people do still struggle with the concept, which I find crazy and a little bit concerning. Yes, thank you for watching my video. I have hundreds of videos. You're welcome to go and check those out if you feel like it. But I would suggest, it is the holiday period and you should not be watching too much YouTube. Go and spend time with your family, your friends. Drink lots of alcohol and other stuff. Eat lots of food. Talk. Get to know each other. Make sure you have a good time. If you want to support the channel, you can. There are different ways of doing that. Patreon, affiliate links down in the description, merchandise shelf, all that sort of stuff. Make sure to share, like, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos. Blah, 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 and all that sort of stuff. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.